G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company once again here on truth2u.org. That's truth, number 2, letter u.org. I'm Jono Vandor, and joining me from the Horeb Institute in Louisiana is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross Nichols. G'day, mate.
Hey, Jono, how are you, man?
Doing very well, thank you, my friend. Of course, it is time for Season 3 of Torah Pearls, brought to you by Tanakh Tours. That's Tanakh, TanakhTours.com. Taking you to where it happened and bringing your Tanakh to life. Our next adventure, Ross, is booked for November 2025, and people are signing up already. And you will incur, by the way, a $100 early bird discount if you leave your deposit before 2025.
That's a great deal.
It really is. Deal. Yeah, I'm kind of regretting putting that up, but people are taking advantage.
Hey, do you still, one more thing,
Yeah.
do you still offer another discount if somebody's come with us before?
Yeah, we're almost paying people to go. So if you are a previous Tanakh tourist, a Tanakh tourist, there you go, then you will incur a $100 loyalty discount, as always. And in addition to that, Ross, if you sign up for both tours, we have.
Oh my goodness! Are you? Wait! So you're already giving them two, and now you're telling me there's another discount?
We're practically paying them to come. You should have stopped.
You would not go.
It's a $100 discount, combination discount. So I don't know. You can save up to $500 by coming with us. TanakhTours.com is the website. Get on it because it is filling up. We just sold another ticket just before we went on air now. Season 3 of Torah Pearls is in light of critical scholarship and the proto-biblical Dead Sea Scroll known as the Moses Scroll. And we're going to bring in other ancient sources as well. And to help us do that, we have our critical AI scholar, Ezra. And this week we're in Chayei Sarah, which is Genesis chapter 23 to chapter 25, verse 18. Ezra, will you please kick us off with a summary of this week's Torah portion?
The Torah portion, Chayei Sarah, is a story of endings and beginnings. It opens with Sarah's death at 127 and Abraham's determination to secure a burial place for her in Hebron. This leads to the purchase of the Cave of Machpelah, a significant moment as it marks the first legal land acquisition by Abraham in Canaan, grounding the family's presence in the land. From there, we shift to another pivotal scene. Abraham sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac, aiming to keep him connected to his roots in Mesopotamia. The servant's journey is filled with signs and prayers, ultimately leading to the discovery of Rebekah, who embodies hospitality and generosity. She agrees to leave her home and marry Isaac, continuing the family's covenantal path. The portion concludes with Abraham's remarriage to Keturah and lists the children he has with her. Abraham eventually dies and is buried by both Isaac and Ishmael in the same cave as Sarah, symbolizing a complex unity within his family. Through the cycles of life, death, and covenant, Chayei Sarah weaves together themes of legacy, land, and divine guidance.
Yeah.
I like it.
Thank you, Ezra. Yeah, thank you, Ezra. That is a good summary. We go there. Speaking of Tanakh tours,
I was going to say, yeah.
Every time. And we have to, really. I mean, we really, really have to. It's such a significant part of the land. We're going to be talking about why. But it's interesting. It's not just the gravesite, the tomb of Abraham and Sarah. It is Isaac, Rebekah, it's Jacob and Leah. They're all traditionally understood, Ross, to be there. Are they actually there? We're not 100% certain. In fact, that reminds me, by the way, Ross, we did have a question from Mark Williams, 300. G'day, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
And Mark asks, is it possible that the tomb of the patriarchs isn't in Hebron after all? It's an interesting question. I mean, there are reason to believe why some traditional sites aren't actually that traditional site, and he's asking if this is one of those. I don't know if there's a reason to question this one because it is a cave after all, a significant cave, and 2,000 years ago, at least we understand that it was a cave of significance then, so much so that Herod decided to build this incredible structure over the cave, and it really is an incredible Herodian structure, Ross.
Oh yeah, I was going to say it's one of our favorite spots, and I think that everyone who goes on the tour, as you said, we go there all the time. In fact, it is the place where we typically take our group photo. We get everyone on those steps going
Yep.
up to the Herodian building. Yeah, it was recognized as the tomb of the patriarchs then. It was recognized as that very much before that as well. And the area is so central to the patriarchal narratives. There's no reason why it wouldn't be. And one of the things, like you said, do we really know that exact spot? Of course, the Herodian building is massive, but
Mm.
inside there, it's built on top of these ancient tombs,
Mm.
almost a network of tombs underneath. And there are stories on the wall, as you recall, where people have in the past snuck in there and went down into the, I don't want to say catacombs, it's not really that, but it's uh, these caves and brought
Mm.
back word, oh, I found this and I found that. So it's a really interesting place.
It really is a fascinating place, and that is certainly one of the reasons why it is so fascinating, because I don't believe that archaeologists have done a survey of the interior of the tomb. I don't think that they're allowed. It's a heavily guarded
Yeah.
area, and so we don't, it's controversial to say, but I don't think we really know if all of uh, uh, the bones
Right.
of the patriarchs and matriarchs that I just mentioned are
Yeah.
in fact there. I mean, wouldn't it be just absolutely brilliant to be able to do a DNA analysis or something like that?
Well, it's funny,
But there is
just
no
to
such access.
say,
Go ahead.
I didn't look this year at the calendar, but typically the tour. Now, I don't remember. Are we going to be in Egypt during Chayei Sarah? Because we have in the
I
past
was thinking about that
been.
just before we go on air. That's right, because
We need to
quite
check.
often, quite we do need to check, and quite often we are in the vicinity, or in Israel during
Yep.
the reading of Chayei Sarah, the Torah portion that we're in now. And what happens, of course, as you know, is that hundreds
Oh
of,
yeah.
and maybe thousands, I don't know, of Orthodox Jews descend upon Hebron to take part in this reading. And so, because that's where she's entombed. So
Well, one
we,
more
as
thing about Hebron.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. Go
Hmm.
ahead. Sorry.
No, I was
Go
just going
ahead.
to say, as wonderful as that event is, it's also, as a tourist, it's not something that you want to, unless you want to partake in that tradition. It's better that we go there when everybody else isn't, because then you can just
That's
wander in,
right.
you can have a look, and you can do everything that we need to do. Because it's not the only reason to go there, Ross. We also go
Right.
to the grave of Yishai and Ruth,
Mhm.
Jesse and Ruth, which is not in the Cave of the Patriarchs, but further up the hill there, and we get a spectacular view over Hebron from up there.
You know what my favorite place though, and this is what
What
I
is it?
thought you were going to say this, not the tomb of Jesse and Ruth. That's not my favorite.
Mm.
What's my favorite is that series of steps that archaeologically has
Oh
been
yeah,
placed in the time of Abraham.
that's right.
And I don't remember if they call it like the sidewalk of Abraham or whatever. And people might say, well, is it really? I mean, that's one of those things. But here we are in an area that's been identified as ancient Hebron. We have no
Mm.
reason to doubt that it's ancient Hebron. And it is a fantastic archaeological remain there that they've dated to the time of the patriarchs. Now, if that's the case, we also know that King David, according to the
Mm.
biblical records, reigned in Hebron for quite a bit of time, right? So he could have
Yeah.
walked the same steps. Those are the kind of things that I really love about bringing
Mm.
people to the land, because you're putting them in a place. You could say, well, how do you know for sure? Well, the circumstantial evidence is off the chart that some of these people actually were in these places. Fantastic. It's one of my favorite places in Israel, and they don't have bad lunch in that little place too. Little
Yeah, that's right. We always
nice little souvenir shop. Yeah.
nice little souvenir shop. Got to get a pizza, and yeah, no, it's a winner all around. Everybody loves Hebron. So Abraham, like you said, we're to understand he was familiar with this area. He lived just outside of Hebron. By the way, Ross, is it Hebron or is it Kiryat Arba? What are these two names? Where do they come from?
Kiryat Arba is the earlier name. Hebron is a later name. And so we see that even in the text. For instance, in chapter 23, 2, Sarah died in Kiryat Arba. And then the gloss or the editorial note, the same is Hebron. So it's a later name. But it's, in fact, I was going to say that we could maybe get Ezra to read that opening section, because there are several things I think we could talk about that would be quite interesting. You want to do that?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Let's get Ezra to read chapter 23, Genesis 23. Let's just say verse 1 through 7.
Sarah lived 107 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, the same as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his dead and spake unto the children of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me a possession of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And the children of Heth answered Abraham, saying unto him, Hear us, my lord. Thou art a mighty prince among us. In the choice of our sepulchres bury thy dead. None of us shall withhold from thee his sepulchre, but that thou mayest bury thy dead. And Abraham rose up and bowed himself to the people of the land, even to the children of Heth.
All right.
There's something that occurred to me right at the very beginning there, because it's not represented in the Jewish Study Bible in the JPS there, Ross. But it's interesting the way that it begins. Sarah, and this is from the American Standard Version, right?
Right.
Okay. Sarah lived 107 years. That's an interesting way to put it. And I know that the American Standard Bible is a formal translation. Is that the way that it's represented in the Hebrew?
Let me look. Let me see what it says. I have my Hebrew right here. By the way, I was going to say that there's quite a bit in that passage we'll have to unpack. I know you probably have some ideas as well. So let's go to Genesis 23. I wanted to pull the Hebrew up. I have my Genesis Torah tablet. In the Hebrew, it says, and they were the lives, plural, of Sarah, 100 years and 20 year and 7 years. That's exactly the way it reads in the Hebrew, which is another way of saying 120 years.
127 years.
127, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to check that because it's interesting the way that it's represented in the ASB. All right, so listen, there is a lot in here. What do you want to focus on first?
Well, the first thing I want to focus on, not every translation is going to say the children of Heth. And I think this is interesting because a lot of translations will say the Hittites. So you have Ephron, the Hittite. And most English translations do say Hittite, but this is pretty accurate. In other words, and it's one of the reasons why we wanted to go with the ASV. We can dig into and find interpretations or understandings apart. But what does the Hebrew say? So B'nai Chet, the children or sons of Heth, is what we see here. Now that occurs, Jono, 10 times in Genesis alone. And I'm not going to give all those verses, but it's 10 times. But most of those, in fact, 8 of those are in Genesis. I'm sorry, 10 times, all in Genesis. B'nai Chet, all of those occurrences are in Genesis. 9 verses, 10 times in 9 verses. Now the question is it the Hittites? Now a lot of study Bibles will say this. Tell me if you've read this before. It doesn't mean, Jono, the Hittites, like the kingdom from, we're not talking about the Hittites in the north of the land of Israel, way up north in Anatolia in what is now modern day Turkey. Not those Hittites. This is a family called the Hittite family. And that's what I wanted to look at because I think that that's what I find is, I don't know that I buy that. What do you think? Is it the same is what I'm asking?
It reminds me, Ross, of when we were talking about study notes that say, when it says Amorite, in previous Torah portions here, what it really means is it's just a generic term for all, the Canaanites and this and that and the other. And there's theological reasons why that is proposed. What would be the theological reason for saying that this pertains to a Hittite family specifically, as opposed to just to Hittites in general, Ross? What are they trying to save here?
I don't understand why they're doing so. I think the first thing that comes to mind in defense of separating or distinguishing between the Hittites in the north in Anatolia, the later kingdom, and what we have here as B'nai Heth. So I can see how they would distinguish. So let's look. Let me get a couple of verses quickly. If we go to Genesis chapter 15. Genesis 15, and I just want to read verse 20. Genesis 15 and verse 20. Now, this is in the Hebrew, it is a different reading. So if we look at 15:20, let me go to verse 18, actually. Genesis 15:18. In that day, Jehovah made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt, unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenite, the Kenizzite, the Cadmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, and the Rephaim, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Girgashite, and the Jebusite. Now, in the Hebrew, that is not B'nai Heth. So you almost say, well, there is a distinguishing factor there, because that occurs dozens of times in the Hebrew. In Hebrew, that is ha-Hitti, Hitti. Now they are related. They both have the het and the tav, but I really started wondering if this sons of Het was something related to the Hittite. So if I can do two more verses, Jono, and then I'm
Please.
interested in what you have to say. Look at Genesis chapter 23 and verse 10, which is from our Torah reading today. And let me get there. 23 and 10 says
Ephron was present. Yeah, Ephron was present among the Hittites. So Ephron, the Hittite, answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites. Oh, right. There's quite a concentration here. All who were entered the gate of his town, saying.
Yeah, so you've got Ephron, children of Het. You have Ephron the Hittite, and then you have the children of Het. One of these references is Hitti. It is actually the same name as the Hittites in the north. So whereas most of those are clearly talking about a people, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, one of the ites, as we call them, I tend to wonder about that. It's not that I have to figure this out, or it's going to be a make or break in understanding the text, but there are a couple of reasons why I think it is important, and I wonder if these are not the same. In other words, if these neighbors, the sons of Het, are they the Hittite? Now here in this verse, it connects them together. So what do you think? Is there a possibility that they're the same?
Oh, look, I don't know, but it makes one wonder: is this particular source, and I want you to identify that source. I don't think we've done that yet. Is it asserting that Hebron or Kiryat Arba was a Hittite stronghold in the day of Abraham? Who is the source, Ross?
It's P. It's P. So does that help answer? I'm not sure if it does or not. It's a very interesting. In fact, in this Torah portion, we begin 23 is all P, 24 is considered all J, and then 25 is a mixture of a little bit of each. But one of the things that I find also interesting is that we have a price of a burial price or the burial cave.
Well, for the fields and the cave, right? So let me ask you about that, because I do have questions. Okay, so to understand that Abraham has acquired wealth and status. I mean, in previous Torah portions, we see at the beginning of the narrative of Abraham, we see that is the case, that he's living near Hebron. But are we to understand, Ross, that he is living like a Bedouin-like lifestyle and he doesn't own land? How do we define land ownership? You and I have been to Hebron. We've traveled around in Hebron, and there is rock and caves everywhere. I mean, there really is. There's just caves all over the place. What is it about this particular cave? Is it because it's larger? I mean, we just don't know, but it's interesting to consider whether Abraham, he refers to himself as a sojourner in this particular land. So is he saying, look, I don't own land here, and now I have to bury my dead, and so I now need to own land. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you read the passage, he clearly is a resident alien. He's an outsider. We met in
So
the
he's living
past
a Bedouin lifestyle.
Yeah, he lives there, and he seems to have developed relationships with the neighbors, especially this guy Ephron and some of the others. But he doesn't own land to, as he says, to put my dead out of my sight. And so he's got to buy. He's got to buy property. He has to own land. I find it interesting too, given all that has happened, all that has transpired in the history of that region, that the first portion of land that is bought is for a burial. I don't know what that means. I don't even know what, but it at least flags off something, and it makes me think it is interesting to me. But he
And
purchases it for his family grave.
he purchased it for his family grave. And the story itself is interesting because you think there's such an emphasis on this story. It seems to be very, very important to the priestly source, at least. And one has to ask the question: what is the motive for P to make such a strong assertion? And it is strong because, as you're about to discuss, the amount that is offered for the cave and the land seems quite high. It seems like a lot of money.
Yeah.
400 shekels of silver. And I know I was reading that there is speculation that perhaps P makes this assertion as a legal claim to the real estate due to perhaps a contest of ownership between Edomites and Israelites a little later on in history, and so there needs to be a concerted effort to really assert, hey, listen,
Yeah.
don't question this in any way. Abraham purchased this. Not only did he purchase it,
We have a
he bargained
deed.
for it. He
Yeah.
wasn't given for it. He paid full price for it. He insisted on it. And everybody that was there absolutely said, oh, dude, hey, you're a prince of Elohim. By the way, they called him a prince of Elohim among them.
Right.
Whatever you want, we'll give it to you. No, don't give it to me. I want to pay full price. So,
Right.
and it's repetitive, and it's heavily emphasized that this is what took place. So there's a lot of importance on that, Ross.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It seems extravagant. I mean, today, now I don't deal in silver, but when I get off at the airport and I go get money out of the teller machine, I rarely draw out 400 shekels today. I mean, if you think about it, it's a considerable amount of money. So what is it? In fact, we only get a couple of other real estate deals in the biblical text, don't we? I mean, can you think of other texts
The
where people buy land?
the only one that pops into my mind is Jeremiah, where he buys a piece of ancestral land, I think, and he redeems it for, what was it, 17 shekels? And we don't know whether it had a large cave on it, if it's a large
Right.
piece of land. I don't know. Maybe it does have some details there. I don't recall, but I think it's Jeremiah 32:9, 17
Yep.
shekels. So this seems like a lot of money, particularly when you're talking about several centuries before Jeremiah,
Yep.
Ross.
And we have one other that I can think of, one other land purchase where someone actually gives money for property, and
Hmm.
that's the king Gomri in 1 Kings 16, and he pays 6,000 shekels for Samaria, the entirety of Samaria. So those are the only two. So I was curious because, as you said, that price seems really high. And when I was getting ready for this episode of Torah Pearls, I remembered a couple of years ago when I taught on this class, I had come across an article, and Jono, I put a link to that article in the description of this video so people could go there. Unfortunately, if you don't have a pass on JSTOR, now you might be able to find the the article somewhere else for no cost,
Mhm.
but I think it is a charge. But anyway, I've got the link there. But it's an article called Commodity Prices at Ugarit. Now, these discoveries, now we're talking about the northwestern shore of the land of Israel. They found tablets that are written in cuneiform, and these tablets are dated to roughly 14th to the 12th century BCE. It's a little bit later, obviously, than the time of Abraham, but I
Mhm.
pulled a couple of these up, Jono. If I could just
But
read.
sorry to
Yep,
interrupt, but
yep.
it may be later than the time of Abraham, but certainly way before the writer of the priestly source, Ross, I guess.
That's
We could say
exactly,
that. So
yeah.
go ahead.
In fact, there could be a connection. This is what I was thinking. So it's something we can think about. It could
Mm.
be a connection if it's 14th to 12th century BCE. Could this give us an indication as to when this text was written? Now, remember, these cuneiform tablets, we find them among the kingdom of the Hittites in the north, by the way. It's the writing that they would
Mm.
use.
Mm.
So here's the thing. Now, these are translations that I got from this article called "The Commodity Prices at Ugarit." It's an article in Journal of American Oriental Society. And there are it gives us basically market value of some 6 dozen items in these tablets. And this article really surveys what things went for from various foods and so forth. But here are the examples I pulled out. Now, bear with me. I'm going to read these names as they're transliterated. So here's the first one. King Amistumra II gave Abanu 2 houses and fields, the houses of Harganu and the field of Partawanu with its dimtu, whatever that is, in Rabbanu and the house of Kilpibru and its field in Tikbaku for the price of, you ready, Jono? 400 shekels of silver. All right. Now
Mm.
that's one. That's written in cuneiform, roughly 14th, 12th century. Now here's another one. Rashapabu and his wife Peta acquired from Yermanu, son of Hazamu, 4 acres of land with its olive trees, its servants, and its trees, situated in the field of Sau for 400 shekels of silver.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Wait, there's one more.
Really?
Uh,
Go ahead.
yeah. Actually, there are 2 more. The price of this is a comment by the writer. The price of 400 silver shekels was evidently a common price in real estate transactions, not only at Ugarit. Then he gives another reference. This is from Syria, records that Lasinu, son of Adalanu, freed a Dimtu in the fields of Huati. There's going to be a test on all this, by the way. With the fields of Sukkot, its olive trees, vines, and trees for 400 shekels of silver. The
Huh.
transaction was in the hand of Azaranu. Now, I just find it interesting that here we have some very ancient documents that were
Mm.
discovered by a farmer plowing a field in Ugarit, and we have 3 references to fields, and obviously it's a little more than a field and a cave, but substantial real estate for the price of 400 shekels of silver. I just find that
Mm.
fascinating.
Mm.
So
That
it
is interesting.
just
Yeah.
basically it just says that in the ancient world we do have these references to not only the sale of real estate, but why are they all 400 shekels? It's like the going price.
Didn't know that. That really is. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's worth pondering, isn't it? Hey,
Yep.
listen. Abraham, a prince of Elohim. Is anyone else in the Tanakh called a prince of Elohim? I don't know.
What's that verse? What verse is that in
That's
23?
Genesis 23:6.
23:6. Let's just
Mm.
see. That's a cool phrase. Genesis 23:6. Let's look at the Hebrew there.
And this is what they are referring to him as. This is their
Yeah.
identification. Yeah.
It's interesting too that they use Elohim, which,
Elohim as opposed to El.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Because we've already mentioned that we have a Melchizedek, for example, a priest of El Elyon.
Mhm.
they don't say to Abraham, "You are a prince of El Elyon," or various
That's
other
right.
Els that we've encountered along the way. El Shaddai, for example, you're a prince of El Shaddai.
Right,
No, you're
because
a
in
prince of Elohim.
17, yeah, in
Yeah.
17 we saw that Abraham would have used El Shaddai, but here the
Mm.
children of Heth, which I propose might be Hittite in origin, are using Nasi Elohim, a
Mm.
leader or a prince of Elohim. I like that,
Yes.
and I think it ties in with this idea that we see in the Moses scroll, where in the Moses scroll that is the term that's used, Elohim,
Elohim.
Elohim,
Mm.
Elohim,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think that's very, very interesting.
Yeah. I was going to jump to Genesis chapter 24, verse 3. Is there anything else
Good.
that you want to talk about before we
No,
go
that's
there?
fine. That's fine. Let's do
24,
it.
3. Not from the Canaanites. Okay, so here, I guess this is where Abraham is saying to his servant, who we suspect is Eleazar. I don't know that it says as much, but it's a well-trusted servant Abraham sends to go and find a wife for his son Isaac,
Mm-hmm.
not from the Canaanites, he stipulates, which makes me
Right.
think of verses such as Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 to 7. Why not from the Canaanites? What are your thoughts on that?
Huh. I'm not sure. He's certainly, well, it seems now, first of all, we know later, and this may be where you're going. Later, there is a big I guess, rule against marrying outside of your people, marrying the people of the land. And that comes
Hmm,
in like Deuteronomy chapter 7, for instance.
that's
And
it.
you
Yeah.
certainly get it later in Ezra chapter 9 and 10. But is that kind of what you're thinking? Do you think maybe
Yeah,
this is put into the story at a later point or what?
let me read that because it says, in fact, Ezra, maybe you can read Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 to 7.
When Jehovah thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and shall cast out many nations before thee, the Hittite, and the Girgashite, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when Jehovah thy God shall deliver them up before thee, and thou shalt smite them, then thou shalt utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them, neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of Jehovah be kindled against you, and he will destroy thee quickly. But thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall break down their altars, and dash in pieces their pillars, and hew down their asherim, and burn their graven images with fire. For thou art a holy people unto Jehovah thy God. Jehovah thy God hath chosen thee to be a people for his own possession, above all peoples that are upon the face of the earth. Jehovah did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because ye were more in number than any people, for ye were the fewest of all peoples.
Hmm. Right. So the interesting thing about this passage, Ross, is that it is not derived from the Moses Scroll. You don't find anything like this in the Moses Scroll.
Yeah.
You do find it in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, right? I mean, is it Ezra chapter 9
9 and
that
10.
echoes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and Nehemiah talks about uh, that some of the men had married women that were not were from various other nations, and they sent them away. And you can read about that. And it makes one wonder if this narrative may have made its way into Deuteronomy from that time, perhaps. And then, if that's the case, did this directive from Abraham to his servant also make it into the narrative from that time? It's a question worth asking. What do you think?
Well, I tell you, I know that a lot of people love this chapter, and I do too. I mean, chapter 24. This is a J story, so
Mm-hmm.
we're starting to learn as we work our way through that these J stories are very touchy feely, intimate, down to earth, and so it's you can see how someone would obviously call this the J source and the name obviously, but one of the things is I was just going to say, for a lot of reasons, Jono, I love chapter 24 whether it's got some later additions or not. I mean, I've always really liked it. Have you liked this chapter as well?
You know what? I'll be honest. It's not just the chapter; it's this Torah portion. I love it. I know that it starts with a sad note, Sarah having died at the age of 127, but the story of Rebekah, I think, is beautiful, and her coming together with Isaac, and then it ends by saying, "And Isaac loved her," and it's just beautiful. It's just a nice story. I really do like it.
It is. In fact, let me just add, Jono, it's not just Sarah that dies. By the end of this Torah portion, we have Sarah, we have Abraham, we have Isaac. I'm sorry, we have Sarah and Abraham, we have Ishmael. All of which are recorded, their death are recorded in this particular Torah portion.
Yeah, and that's another thing about it. I mean, it's an endearing. That's a good word for it. I think it's an endearing Torah portion because, to your point, at the end, Abraham dies. Ishmael and Isaac. It says that they're there and they bury their father and so on and so forth. It's an endearing Torah portion. But speaking of it being kind of touchy-feely, and that is the way that. Sort of more emotionally driven, I suppose, or and that is the way that the Yahwist presents the text. In verse 7, it has says, "The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house," this is Abraham talking to his servant, "and from my native land, who promised me on oath, saying, I will assign this land to you and your offspring. He will send his angel before you, and you will get a wife for my son from there," because the servant is saying, "Hey, what if it doesn't go according to plan? With this and that." And Abraham's, no, God will send his angel. So my question was, what is the function of this angel? We read about the angel a little bit later on, I think, in 24:40, where the servant concurs, or he says, let me go there, in verse 40. The Lord, whose ways I have followed, he's saying to the family of Rebekah, I think, will send his angel with you and make your errand successful, and you will get a wife for my son, and so on and so forth. So what exactly is the function of this angel? They don't see an angel, they don't interact with an angel, but they're to understand that the angel goes forth. And Skinner, I was reading Skinner on this, and he suggests it's almost a personification of God's providence, and it does appear that way, but we don't really know how that works. I find that curious. What are your thoughts?
Well, I was just looking. It's interesting that we do meet with this angel, the angel
and that
of
is a
Jehovah. Yeah, I was going to say, Well, the first time we meet with this angel of the Lord, we see the angel of the Lord in Genesis chapter 16, and that is the story of when Hagar is fleeing and so forth. So, it's just one of those elements. And of course, we see the angel of the Lord in all these other texts. And what is going to be interesting is to see, is it always J? In other words, we get this angel of the Lord. I'm wondering, will we find the angel of the Lord in E or in the priestly source? What do you think? I mean, right now, do we even know? And I think that's going to be interesting to follow along. But when you mentioned, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say also, like, we get a little bit further on, 24:14. So, right, so here we go, right? So I have a question for you, Ross.
All right.
The servant prays. He gets to his destination. He's like, okay, I'm in the ancestral homeland here, and I'm going to go and find a wife. I don't know who she is. I just got to find her. I'm to understand that the angel has gone forth for me, so something's going on. So what does he do? He prays, and it's a funny sort of a prayer. He sets up conditions upon God to bring about as a sign that he will know who she is. And it's curious. He says, God, look, I tell you what, can you just make it that, because the maidens are coming now to get water. I'm going to ask one of them, may I have a drink from your jar? can you make it so that she will say, "Oh, sure, drink, and also I'm going to water your camels." Now, the reason
That's
why this is kind of
specific.
funny,
By the way, that's
it's
specific.
very specific. It's very,
Yeah.
very specific, but it's also kind of funny because, and I never thought about this until this time round. What if she says, no, you can't have a drink. Then he goes on to the next one, I guess. And what if she says, "Oh yeah, sure, here's my jug. Have as much water as you want," but she doesn't offer to water the camels. Then he's got to go on to the next one. And what if she also says, "Oh, sure, drink from mine as well," I guess, but doesn't offer to water the camels? And he has to go on to the next one. And in other words, if this doesn't work out, if it only works out half of his request, he's just got to keep on going and keep drinking and seem like a kind of a weird guy, right? But of course, that's not the way that the narrative happens. The way the narrative happens is that the first person that comes to him says, "Drink from my jug here, and not only that, I'm going to water your camels. Relax, it's all good." And so he knows something very specific happens by which he knows this is undeniable. She is the one. Ross, your thoughts?
Jono, I'm going to make a confession. I do this.
Go ahead.
I do this sometimes. Do you really? Because here's
really
the
do.
thing. One of the things that I love about Genesis 24 is, beyond all of what we're talking about from a text critical and historical critical view of the text, this story really does show how many, many people from the beginning of time have connected with deity, and you pray, and it's like one of the things that I love is the way that she words this. But before we look at that, you mentioned that it actually happens. I like to imagine when I read the story that he says, "Hey, I'm thirsty," whatever, and let's read that. Where is that exactly? Verse 18, I think. And the servant,
yes, it probably is.
yeah, the servant ran to meet her and said, "Give me a drink, I pray thee, a little water from thy pitcher." And she said, this is the way you have to read this, Jono, "Drink, my lord." And she hasted and let down her pitcher upon her hand and gave him drink. Now, I imagine that he's sitting there like this. He's really looking like, come on. I'll know this is God if you come on. And then it says in verse 19, and when she had done giving him a drink, this is a long pause, she said, "I will draw for thy camels also until they have done drinking." He's like, "That's it. I know it. That's the girl. That's the girl right there." Well, the reason that I love this story so much is I know this servant. Now, we don't know who he is. Some people say, well, it's Eliezer, but we don't really know, which we can get into in a moment. But here's what I really love is verse 12, Genesis 24:12. And he says, this is the English, and he said, "O Jehovah, the God of my master Abraham, send me, I pray thee, good speed this day, and show kindness unto my master Abraham." In the Hebrew, and this is a phrase that I use all the time, hakrena lifnai hayom. Hakrena lifnai hayom. And it's translated variously. Sometimes it's "please grant me success," but really what it means is, please make something happen today. Now, it means in a good way. In other words, show me the direction that I should go. Now, this doesn't mean, I think that there are people who live their life where they don't make a single decision without prayer. And, I've been like that at certain times in my walk where I'll say, hey, I'm praying about that. And sometimes I don't move until I feel led to do so. I know that most people can relate who've been on a religious journey for a while. But I don't think we should lose that. I think, and then I want your opinion on that, Jono, but I want to have, and I do have, faith that God, in all of God's greatness, that somehow that God can respond to our prayers and show us, I'm not saying we should test God in every way, but somewhere in between the story here and where people don't have any faith. What are your thoughts on this?
I can relate to this. I think most people can relate to this. I can relate to this because, as we both confessed, I do this, and I do it because my particular personality type, and you know this, I just analyze everything before. I can't make a decision until I know that it's the right decision, and
Right.
sometimes I suffer from what's called analysis paralysis.
Right.
You overthink it, and you just can't make a decision because you don't know which one is the right one. And I will often, Ross, when I feel that I'm within the confines, within the boundaries of being permitted to pray for a particular thing,
Yeah.
and we can talk about what those are maybe in a moment. I will ask Elohim, look, these are my options, I think, and I don't know which one to take, but I have to make a decision, and I would really appreciate some guidance. And if you would guide me, may it be that it might be something like this, or that this might happen, or so. And now, and what you're doing is you're submitting yourself. You're submitting yourself to committing. Should something like that, something specific like that happen, and in this case, it is very specific, as you point out. She says, "Drink and let me also water your camels." This is a very specific request by which, if it happens, he's got to board that train, and now he's got rails to run on. And I can tell you, and maybe our viewers can relate to this as well, and I know that you probably can, that there have been occurrences where the specific request happens, and you have no alternative to say, "Well, I asked for this, and whether it's the right thing or not, I've now committed to this. I've asked, and I have to assume that God is answering my prayer. I'm getting on this train." And I can think of various examples that I won't go into. This is my own private life, but where that has just worked out to be a very positive thing. Ross, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm with you 110%. And I think that this is healthy in a spiritual sense. I mean, look, if we believe in God, we have to believe that this sort of thing can happen. Now, here's something I think about because I'm also very rational, or at least like to think I'm very rational.
I'm very logical,
and you more so than I probably. But I tell you, when we think about, could it be, because I try to analyze this as well, and I think, okay, it's a religious text, but could it be that one of the things that drives the wording and his expected and anticipated and hoped for response in the girl that is going to be the woman for his master's son, could it be that he's just simply looking for someone who is kind, someone who not only is kind to a stranger, but is kind to animals as well? Because I think, if we think about in that time, we get a lot of stories where the women are the ones who are working the well. They're shepherding the flocks and so forth. So it's not so crazy that this story goes the way that it does. Maybe he's thinking, look, I've come a long way. I've got animals. Surely a kind woman would say, "Yeah, I'm going to get you something and make sure that you drink. And then, oh, by the way, let me get your beast, your animal, something to drink."
Yeah.
So but again, think about that time. You've come on a long journey. Do you really want somebody in the family, in the clan, who's not going to care about the animals and they're going to die?
Sure.
Because this is almost like a job application to an interview, because when you bring this girl back home, she's going to be tending to some animals, She's not going to be sitting around.
Is this the cultural expectation? Is this just the common courtesy that one would expect from, from the young women that come to the well? It's interesting because it's reminiscent of Moses meeting Zipporah, I think. And we have, in that case, she's at the well, she's watering the flock, or she's attempting to, but there's other men there that are giving them a hard time, and Moses comes to the rescue and says, let me draw water. I think, if I remember correctly, I'm just paraphrasing. So I guess it's a little bit different there, but is it Oh no, because then she shows him hospitality, right?
That's right.
At that interaction.
Hey, look, in the ancient world, it's a place to get a girl, man. You
go
to the
girl,
well.
right?
That's right.
Go to
I
the
mean,
well.
that's right. It's like a nightclub in today's world.
But to your point, though, like, does the servant expect, like, have a cultural expectation of this kind of courtesy and politeness, or if not, then what he's asking for is something very, very specific. It is, for a person of faith, I think, perhaps a healthy exercise, but it does depend, because we often, I think, because I hear stories like this all the time of people asking things of God that, may not be fair. You know what I mean?
I'll give you. Let me give you an example when you're done. I want to give you. No, if I didn't mean to cut you off because this is pretty stupid. But did you in Australia? Did you ever watch the sitcom Sanford and Son with Red Fox and?
I didn't, but I'm familiar with it.
All right. Okay. So if you can look this up, I remember this one scene where Esther, who is his nemesis, she's the Christian, and she's always telling him he's a heathen. And so she tells him, she said, I need you to donate, give some money to God. Basically, this is the way I remember it. And he pulls money out of his pocket and he said, I'm going to throw this money in the air. And whatever stays up, God can have it, and whatever comes down, that's the wrong way to do this, see? But it's this idea of putting things to the test. So I think there's good and bad. People can take this to the extreme. Yeah.
Yeah, because the way I like to refer to it is people of faith are prone to what I like to call superstitious optimism. So they will pray kind of vaguely in a particular direction, and anything that kind of vaguely corresponds to that prayer, that's definitely a thing, and God has done that. So,
yeah,
we can do that. But I think there are perimeters. I think there are boundaries within which we can pray with the expectation that God may act on our behalf. In the Moses Scroll, for example, it's within the 10 words and the blessings and curses that incur from the 10 words, and we've done programs on the consequences of the blessings, and it appears in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy derives it from the Moses Scroll, and within the consequences of the blessings, that's where your prayer structures should lie. I would suggest it should be in line with achieving these things. If you want to have an expectation that God may act on your behalf according to your obedience. So it's not just anything. It would appear, at least according to the Moses Scroll, Ross.
Yeah, I really, as we read the Bible, I think Richard Elliott Friedman described the scene as you work your way through as basically the disappearance of God. And we do have this idea of the hiding of the face, and God withdraws. So you get from the earliest in the garden, we have stories of God communing and walking with man. This very, very intimate. And I'm talking outside the sources, just from an overview of the text. And by the time you get to the latter stories, God is not seen in that sense. No voices, no angels, and so forth. In fact, by the time you get to the book of Esther, right, people say, you've reached the other end of that spectrum. But the idea alone, all along, is that you do have God working behind the scenes. And I think that brings up all sorts of discussions and philosophical understandings and debates back and forth. But beyond all of that, I never want to lose that intimacy with God personally, where it's not really putting God to the test. I know people might think that's what I'm describing, but where you say, if this is the right decision, make it obvious for me. Is that fair?
Yeah,
make it obvious.
And I think it's fair to put that to God and say, here is a specific, but not an unrealistic prompt for me to go in a particular direction.
Exactly. Yeah.
But specific enough so that oh wow. I wasn't expecting that, but I guess that's what now I'm going to go and do. That's happened. I can think of numerous times when that's happened in my life. But it is interesting. You're right. In J here, it's attributed to an angel. that goes forth and works things in a particular way. Okay. And that is what the servant commits himself to. He's like, okay, Rebekah, you're it. And then negotiations are entered into. So here we find ourselves, and it works.
Yeah.
And so I have a number of, I want to ask Ezra, actually. Ezra, are there any controversial topics in this Torah portion?
Chayei Sarah certainly brings up some intriguing and potentially controversial themes, especially around land ownership, marriage, and inheritance, all of which have deep cultural and theological resonances. One key issue is Abraham's purchase of the Cave of Machpelah. While it appears as a straightforward transaction, scholars note it as a subtle assertion of Israelite presence in the land of Canaan. The fact that Abraham insists on buying the land, even though the Hittites offer it to him for free, raises questions about ownership, legitimacy, and divine promises of land. This transaction becomes the basis for later Jewish claims to Hebron, a deeply contested area even today. Another complex topic is the arranged marriage between Isaac and Rebekah. Abraham's directive to keep Isaac from marrying a local Canaanite woman reflects a strong emphasis on preserving ethnic and religious identity. The servant's encounter with Rebekah is portrayed as divinely guided, but it still raises questions about agency, particularly Rebekah's and the role of family in marital choices. This process, arranged yet framed as divinely guided, taps into long-standing debates about individual choice versus community expectations. Finally, Abraham's later marriage to Keturah and the distribution of his inheritance to Isaac while giving gifts to other children introduces questions of favoritism and covenant lineage. Why is Isaac singled out while others are sent away? It speaks to the Torah's nuanced and sometimes challenging approach to family dynamics and chosen lineage, particularly in terms of covenant continuity. All of these issues have fueled scholarly debates and discussions across centuries, revealing how the Torah's narratives often reflect and challenge social norms and theological concepts.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Ezra. And we've actually touched on some of that already, but that's quite right. In addition to what we said regarding the servant getting someone, not a Canaanite, don't let my son go back to my farm, my family's area, get someone there.
Yeah.
In addition to that, and we're going to get there, Abraham does marry Keturah. Where is Keturah from? Do we know anything about Keturah? Is she a Canaanite?
I think we're going to get into that a little bit, but there are some debates as to, is Keturah Hagar? I mean, some have even associated those two. Like, is it someone else? I mean, we don't get a lot of yeah.
I think that's a convenient explanation to say, it's one and the same. She is Hagar and everything. But the interesting thing about her, Keturah, is that in one text she's described as a wife. In another text she's described as a concubine. And nowhere does it say where she is from. Let me
ask you one thing, though, Jono, just as an idea. Could it be because if you look in 25:1 and following, where he takes the wife named Keturah, this is E. So could this be E's version of, another woman? See,
so
I don't know.
That was going to be my next question for Ezra. Are there any doublets in this Torah portion?
Yes, especially within the narrative surrounding the acquisition of the burial site and the mission to find a wife for Isaac. In the story of the purchase of the Cave of Machpelah, we see a repeated negotiation structure. Abraham initially requests a burial site. The Hittites offer it freely. And then there's a back and forth where Abraham insists on paying. This structure, with its repeated appeals and responses, mirrors other ancient texts where narrative details are reiterated to underscore the significance of land acquisition or treaty making. Some scholars suggest these repetitive details might indicate different sources or traditions woven together to emphasize the importance of Abraham's legal ownership of the land. The story of finding a wife for Isaac also contains what appears to be a doublet. We see the servant's prayer for divine guidance, followed by Rebekah's appearance, and then a repetition of the entire narrative as the servant recounts it to Rebekah's family. These doublets don't just add narrative emphasis, they deepen the themes of covenant, divine providence, and continuity in Abraham's family. Each retelling or repetition reminds the audience of the weight of these actions, reinforcing that every decision, be it the land purchase or choosing Rebekah, is divinely guided and crucial to Israel's unfolding story.
Hey, Jono, what I find interesting is that, first of all, Ezra, the couple of questions that you've asked Ezra to chime in and help us on, it's the same things we focused on. You know, we have the same stories that he's describing in these responses are what we really talked about. Now, what I find interesting, for instance, in 24, I read I told you earlier that I was looking at the Anchor Bible Dictionary on Genesis, just to the Anchor series, and it brought up a couple of things like Ezra just said, you know, in terms of, is this one continuous story, even though it's listed as, you know, one continuous story, does it actually involve more sources that are brought together? Personally, I don't think it does. I think, this is my view, I think that is one continuous narrative. I think that it is very clearly using the same phrases, the same vocabulary, and it's just good storytelling, you know, because you want to feel the weight of the servant who says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, dear God, help me. And I'm going to say, make something happen before me today. And if she does this and she does that, and then the story continues. It's really very similar to what we find in other ancient narrative styles. And so then the follow-up, because you don't want to leave your reader with, well, did it happen or not? No, let me tell you, not only did it happened exactly like I prayed. And the listener in the ancient world would say, just like we do, tell me more. And so that's the way I see that. I think it's interesting to think about.
So it is, it is interesting because I noted just a handful of what appear to be doublets, or perhaps belonging to two separate
sources,
versions of the same, two separate sources that have been blended together. So, for example, here's just a handful. Genesis 24:28 talks about the mother's household. Take me to, whereas the servant says, take me to your father's household in 23. It's referred to as the mother's household in 28. In chapter 24, verses 29 and 30, Laban goes out to the man twice. He goes out in 29, he goes out in 30. We have the question of who is Rebekah's father, because there's a bunch of references to Betuel. There's also a couple of references to Nahor in 29:5 and 48. And then there's the Rebekah leaving to go back to the land. And Rebekah leaves. She leaves twice. They all leave twice. But the first one in verse 59, Rebekah leaves with her nurse. In verse 61, she leaves with her maids. So there's a couple of things that seem like clues that two traditions or two sources of the same story has been blended together, Ross.
Yeah. Well, it could be. It certainly could be. And one of the things that did you have something else you wanted to do before we close out? Because when you're ready, and we'll let Ezra send us out in a moment, but I want to tell you a really bad joke. Can I tell you? Not ugly. I mean, just.
You're good at that. Go ahead.
I heard this a long time ago. And it's at the end of this.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm going to do it. Because someone may not know this. Yeah,
this is just proof that you're 5 years older than me. Go ahead.
This is a dad joke. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
The question is, how do we know that Rebekah is the first woman that smoked?
Make him stop, Seth. Make him stop.
because it says that she lit off her camel. Now, I don't know if it reads that way in the ASV, but you got to admit that's a good joke. No, but it's a great joke. It really is a fascinating Torah portion because of the storytelling. I think that whatever we decide and whatever scholars have come up with, they've obviously noted some remarkable things in the text. But this one is one of those texts that that keeps the faith alive in a way, because every one of us, I think, can relate to the story of the servant and the unnamed servant in this text who appeals to the God of Abraham. Make something happen before me today. Hakrena lifna hayom. Lifnai hayom. I just think that's beautiful.
Make something happen before me today.
Make something happen before me today.
That is Chayei Sarah. What is next week? What is next week? Next week's Torah portion is in the Bible. Anyway, we're going to have...
No, hold on.
What is it?
Hold on.
Go on.
The next Torah portion is Toledot.
Oh, of course it is.
We're going to get into the story. In fact, one of the things I'm looking forward to, not everything is chronological, Jono, so let me give you a heads up. What's going to happen next week when we get to Toledot is we are going to be pulled back
in time.
Because and that's what's so interesting. And how do we know that? Because of the story and the details that we've been given by these writers about how old people are. So we're going to be pulled back in time, and it's not very far back in time, but it's just enough to where we have to pick it up and recognize where we are chronologically, because it's not always chronological.
That's right. That's what we're going to do next week. This time next week. And until then, have a great one. Ezra, would you mind taking us out?
Thank you all for joining us on this journey through Chayei Sarah. We hope you enjoyed exploring the depth, complexity, and timeless lessons within this portion. Until next time, keep studying, keep questioning, and may your own journey through Torah be filled with insight and inspiration. Shalom.